Okay, we're live now.
We're all good to go. Okay, thank you. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Georges River Local Planning Panel for 7 April 2022. My name is Stephen Alchin and I'm the chair of the panel. The panel is currently streaming to you from the council chambers in Marn Street, Hurstville. The panel members who make up the panel today are Awais Paracha, an expert panel member, Marcus Sainsbury, another expert panel member, and Jenny Simpson, who is the community representative on this panel. We are the panel who've been appointed by the Minister for Planning to determine specified development applications, including the development applications that are on the agenda today in accordance with the requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. The panel acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which this meeting is being broadcast as that of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm required to advise you that under provisions of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, this meeting of the panel is being live streamed and will be made available on Council's website. In accordance with the revised meeting protocols during COVID-19, interested parties wishing to make representations to the panel were requested to register a summary of their interests. A total of 9 registrations were received and forwarded to this panel. The panel has reviewed the registrations and has advised the council officers they wish to speak with the following persons, who will be called during the course of this meeting in order of the items as published on the council's website. 3 of those persons wish to talk about the development application for the childcare centre at 977 Forest Road, Lugano. They are Phil Armisen, George Antonio, and Taper Malifa. 5 members wish to discuss or present on the proposed residential flat building at 46 to 48 Macquarie Place, Mortdale. They are Benjamin Black, Kitty Tan, Philip Ng, Claire Partridge and Stephanie Behag. And finally, there's 1 person wishing to talk about the proposed modification to the development consent for a flat building in 2 to 8 James Street in Blakehurst, Mr Darren Labert. The panel has received completed assessment reports from council staff for these development applications. The panel has undertaken inspection of the sites and nearby localities for the 5 matters on the agenda today. We'll deal with each application in order as published on Council's website. They will be DA 2021-0047 in relation to 977 Forest Road, Lugano, the fit out of part of the existing building for a childcare centre. DA 2021-0156 in relation to 46 to 48 Macquarie Place, Mortdale, for development or demolition works and construction of a residential flat building. I should let you know that DA or modification 2021-0161 in relation to development at 74 and 76 Edward Street, Carlton, has been withdrawn by the applicant prior to this meeting and will not be considered. DA 2004, or what is now the 4th item on the agenda, is DA 2021-0404 at 15 Marine Drive, Oatley, in relation to alterations and additions to a dwelling and construction of a swimming pool and front fence. DA 2021-10367 in relation to 23 Railway Parade and 1 Centre Street, Penshurst, concerning the erection of a sign. And finally, modification number 2022-0011 for the development at 2 to 8 James Street, Blakehurst, that concerns the modification of consent number DA 2020-0366 for demolition works and the construction of a residential flat building. As required by the Local Planning Panel Code of Conduct, panel members are required to disclose any conflicts of interest in respect of any matter on the agenda for a panel meeting. The relevant forms, as prescribed by the New South Wales Department of Planning, have been completed and a table for council to be included in the online minutes of this meeting. No panel member has disclosed any conflict of interest in any matter on today's agenda. The meeting process. As we progress through the matters on this agenda, only those persons who have registered to speak will verbally be able to make representations to the panel. I'd ask those persons that are invited to speak to the panel via the Teams meeting that they speak clearly into a volume that will project into the speakers to assist those viewing the live stream. so they can hear clearly what's being said. At this time, I remind those persons that any defamatory, discriminatory or offensive language that they use may result in the author being exposed to liability, for which counsel and the panel take no responsibility. Once we've heard all of the oral submissions on a particular application, we'll move on to the next application. Members of the public are free to continue to listen to the broadcast. The determination of the applications will be made in closed session, which is not live streamed or recorded. The determination will be made available on Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting being held. They're my introductory comments. So I'll now turn to the first item, which is the proposal for the childcare centre at 977 Forest Road, Lugano, sorry. The first speaker is Mr. Armisen. Mr. Armisen, you have the floor.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can hear me clearly. Am I correct? You've received my submission?
Yes, we
beforehand.
Yes, we have.
What I propose is to briefly highlight 7 of the more significant deficiencies in my submission, with some introductory comments and a wrap up. So firstly, I found it unbelievable when I saw Council's recommendation for a conditional approval of the application. Since 2010, Council has consistently said the building and the site are just not suitable for a childcare. 9 times the applicant has submitted documents in support of its application. This effort by the applicant is just as deficient as the previous ones. But in reading the assessment report, it became clear as to why Council is recommending approval this time. For some reason, Council has taken upon itself the preparation of this application. By doing that, it of course has to then recommend approval. I just find all this incredible. Anyway, irrespective of whose application it is, the application is nowhere near ready for any approval. The applicant wasn't even shown the 100 consent conditions, 29 of which, by my count, are specific conditions attempting to address the application's deficiencies. There's no way the applicant has had sufficient time to properly assess the implications and acceptability of all these conditions prior to this meeting. So with regard to those significant deficiencies, the first one, I want to make the point, the applicant's proposal has been changed by Council's consent conditions. The applicant said there would be no overlap of church and childcare activities. Now, Council's proposal permits other uses between 10:30 a.m. and 2 p.m. This change has impacts on noise and parking. The applicant's noise assessment is no longer valid. An updated noise assessment is required, which will most certainly impact on necessary noise attenuation works. Only 4 front car spaces are available for the other uses. This has curbside parking impacts that haven't been assessed. Council's report makes no mention of these matters that must now be addressed. My second concern is the assessment report glosses over the very real potential for hazardous traffic and parking in Ponderosa Place. Ponderosa is a cul-de-sac, and worryingly, it has no footpaths. The report asserts that DCP requirements regarding this on-street parking are complied with. This is incorrect. The report refers to the applicant's traffic assessment, which makes no mention of neighbourhood parking. Separately, the report says the traffic engineer has assessed the parking within the site and raises no concerns with the parking arrangement. Did the engineer even consider any off-site parking issues as required by the Development Control Plan requirements? This is a genuine public safety issue and can't be left unassessed. The third concern confusingly, the assessment report says hours of operation of the other users are not approved under this application, despite including consent conditions seemingly saying the opposite. It doesn't say how then those hours are to be approved. If it's by a separate DA, which DA should be approved first? It doesn't cover that. Another issue, consent condition 10 requires a building certificate for previous unauthorised excavation work. This, by the way, wasn't mentioned in my submission. The applicant has been aware of this for a year now. The certificate still hasn't been submitted. This is a structural safety matter which should have been dealt with years ago. Is there a problem with getting the certificate? Surely this has to be resolved before this application goes any further. Regarding the plan of management, it's agreed this plan is essential for the site. The applicant points out, though, a provision in the State Environmental Planning Policy does not allow council to enforce an operational plan of management. What's the point then of the plan? The assessment report's simplistic response is, no, it is enforceable because it is a condition of consent. From my experience, I'd say that response is a pretty weak argument. The enforceability of this plan must be immediately resolved. The plan is fundamental in ensuring the environmental amenity of residents. Item number 6, the childcare has previously been refused because of insufficient solar access and natural ventilation. Miraculously, this no longer seems to be a concern, despite no building change and doors and windows having to remain closed. So how was the problem overcome, if it was? The final concern, with regard to permissibility, the applicant says the childcare use is complementary to existing church use. The assessment report says it's ancillary to church use. Conflictingly, council's assessment report consent conditions make the church use ancillary to the childcare. Which is correct? This is relevant in assessing the permissibility of the childcare in light of existing approved uses. In response to this matter being raised, the assessment report says the childcare is permissible because the zoning says so. This simply sidesteps the issue of competing uses on the site. Permissibility needs to be satisfactorily addressed. Those 7 concerns I've mentioned are not new. I included at the end of my submission to the panel some of the reasons the last panel refused the application. I'll give you a flavour of how those reasons were dealt with by the applicant. I'll read.
Mr. Armisen, if you could try and keep it relatively concise, given the time available for the meeting.
Okay, well, I won't read out the typical like this. The proposal is consistent. The claim is disputed. The information is adequate. So, just skipping the other 8 similar statements, that's just how the applicant has consistently dealt with the identified deficiencies since the first application in 2011. It refuses to accept certain matters have to be resolved. It just resubmits its application, making a mockery of the DA process. Giving it a conditional approval now is not going to magically lead to solutions. All it will achieve is to lock residents and LPP out of the process. It's too soon for that. The poor application and assessment report we have before that, for us, show that. It will lock in unworkable consent conditions. I'm asking the panel to make your assessment on the merits of the proposal you have before you now, not on what the applicant might present in the future. Finally, I have to say, nothing in the assessment report or the applicant's documents tells me there will be benefits for the local community from this proposal, or that it aligns with zone objectives. Problems are being glossed over with no offsetting benefit to local community. This must be considered. The application has to be refused so all deficiencies can be properly and collectively resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armisen. Do any members of the panel have any questions in light of Mr. Armisen's presentation?
No questions from me, Chair. Thank you.
If not, then thank you very much, Mr. Armisen. I will now move to Mr. Antonio. Mr. Antonio, you've got the floor. Thank you.
Hey, all, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I guess, yeah, just confirming as well, you received my written submission for 2 pages that will allow to upload.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I just want to touch on one of the points that Phil.
Oh, we just dropped out. Hello, we've lost the sound.
How about now?
That's better, yes. Could you just repeat those words?
I was just going to touch on the component about ancillary development and permissibility. So, yeah, essentially, there's a planning circular actually from the New South Wales planning that defines ancillary, and essentially it does say that if a component serves the dominant purpose, it is ancillary to that dominant purpose. If a component serves its own purpose, it is not a component of the dominant purpose, but an independent use on the same land. The development could be described as a mixed-use development. And what I'm raising around this issue is that, you know, there's the conditions of consent that allow usage of other facilities in the building, while the childcare is not in the drop-off and pick-up time. So I think it was 9:30 to 2:30, some sort of range there. You know, the enforcement of that is via this DA, whereas the church operations is via another DA in the past, which I'm not too sure which is the relevant one, or a building certificate for the usage. You know, there's nothing stopping the applicant or the owner from a CDC application for strata subdivision on this block of land. And if that happens, then, you know, that childcare component could be sold off, and the, you know, you got 2 DAs on 2 different, essentially, lots that have cross enforcement for usage. And there's also a residential component. So there's 3 uses on this one site. What really should happen is there should be 1 full DA lodged for the entire site, so that there's 1 plan of management for all the areas and 1 consistent application, because at the moment it's going to be a mess if there are, you know, issues with enforcement in the future, which, you know, as you can see in the assessment report, I think there's been some enforcement action by council for non-compliance in previous operations. So really it's messy. That's what I'm putting it down to. And, you know, a mixed use in an R2 zone, you know, needs to be considered in its entirety, not in pieces. So for that reason, I'm not sure if that's something that can be refused for under the public interest, but I believe, you know, there is an interest in that, you know, there could be a childcare on this site, but not in the way it's been done. And then I guess I'll talk to a couple of points I've made in my letter about the BCA non-compliance. There's no BCA report. You are obligated as the assessing authority to consider the BCA as part of your assessment. I sort of highlighted 2 areas there where there's clearly non-compliance. There are conditions of consent that say that the construction certificate must be, you know, compliant with the BCA, but it cannot be achieved without coming back to council for a modification to address those non-compliances. And really they are physical issues. one being the driveway at the front, the floor levels can't really change because of the trees. And, that's been a big point because I think they have the brick paving nominated so that air and water can breathe. You can't put bitumen in that car park area. And, when you look at the crossfalls of the area there, you're non-compliant on the accessible car spot. So straight up, you're not going to be able to get a CC. And then you look at the actual car spots, the 4 car spots, at a 1:10 ratio, those RLs I've picked up from putting together pieces of past DA applications and current one, because the plans don't have great RLs on that front driveway. At a 1:10 ratio, when you open a door, you're going to hit the other car. You're not going to be able to hold your door open. So, and that's all just standard, items that would be picked up and assessed as part of a BCA report. But again, I didn't see one uploaded online. There wasn't one mentioned in the statement of environmental effects, and there doesn't seem to be any reference to one in the assessment report. So, and on that, the accessibility crosses over on that as well. The accessible car spot is just clearly not compliant. So again, no certifier will issue a construction certificate for this approval. So, and I know councils aren't in the habit of approving, DAs that cannot achieve a construction certificate. So, the only way to fix it is via modification, but then it comes back to what happens to the trees then. So it's just a bit messy there because the report hasn't been lodged and considered. And then lastly, sort of the amenity of the actual space. So, it's obviously surplus space to the existing users, and physically, dimensionally, it does look like it's fine for a childcare, and that's okay. But when you actually look at the amenity in this, you can see in the plans, there's how many pillars in this place, and the depth from any windows. There's a large area where the the childcare planning guideline says they should have, direct access to natural sunlight. I'd say 1/3 of the space doesn't achieve that. I think it's 2.5 times room depth. So, again, just it's in a space that I think's not appropriate to have a childcare centre. If it's going to be approved, not even to the highest qualities, just to the standards outlined in the child planning guideline. And then lastly, it's another bit of a technicality of why you need a single DA for the entire place. The floor to ceiling heights, when they're sub 2.7 metres, which again in my submission I found an old extract from a survey which showed the RLs, it doesn't matter, it's non-compliant with the BCA, it's sub 2.7, I think it's 2.6 metres. If you're under those numbers, you can only have a maximum of 100 people on site at any one time. So again, how does the certifier give restrictions on the church use when it's not part of this DA? It all just sort of circles back to it really should be a proper DA which should resolve all those building certificates, all those, usage questions about how does the church work, how does the childcare work, has the acoustic report assessed when they're both operating at the same time. There can be a plan of management for the entire site enforced through the conditions of consent, but it's just in too many pieces, and it's just not in the public interest to approve it, in the current format the way it is. So that's pretty much everything I have to add for today.
Thank you, Mr. Antonio. Do panel members have any questions? No. No, thank you very much, panel. But we have got your submission, which we will consider. Mr. Malifa, I think it is, you're speaking on behalf of the applicant. You have the floor, thank you. You're on mute, I'm afraid. You're on mute. We can't hear you. Could you switch on your microphone? There we go, I think.
Yeah, I did not register to speak. I just wanted to be in the meeting while you were considering our application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If there's nothing else to be said or no others to speak on this item, I will now turn to the second application on the agenda, which is in relation to Macquarie Place rather, at Mortdale. The first person who's registered to speak is Benjamin Black. Are you on the call, Mr. Black?
Hello, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you. You're coming through.
Great, thank you. Did you say there was 5 people registered? There may be two of the 5 that are objectors, and I'm on behalf of the applicant. I don't know if you want to hear from me first or.
Yes, thank you. That's the order we've got, so please take the lead.
No problem. And if I can be of assistance later to respond to objector issues, I'm happy to do so as well. So thank you to the panel and the opportunity to make a submission in relation to this proposal. I have with me Kitty Tan, who's the architect, and Philip, who you've indicated are registered to speak. Now, I will perhaps steal some of their time, and those people, Kitty and Philip, will be available to answer any questions, technical questions, should you need them to, but they don't wish to present to the panel per se. So it is disappointing that we're here with an application that's been with the council for near on 12 months, recommended for refusal, and I would hope that I can convince the panel today to either approve the application or have the matter deferred for amendments, and I'll explain the reasons why. The first point of contact in terms of the assessment was from the planner to the architect in July, I think it was, and there are various statements made that gave the impression that provided certain things would happen that would edge our way towards an approval. Now, a number of those items have reappeared now as issues which we weren't made aware of previously, so it's caught us a bit by surprise. First of all, there was a contamination assessment done and a remediation action plan as council requires for all applications. That comes at considerable expense to the applicant to undertake those investigations, and would hope that the panel would show some consideration of that in looking at this application and considering the points that I'm about to make. The main issue, or one of the main issues raised in the setbacks for the sides is the privacy screen issues. So the setbacks are less than the 6 metres anticipated by the ADG, but both at the pre-DA stage and from the council's correspondence in July, we were given the impression that privacy screens would resolve those issues, and we've moved along on that basis. And so it's surprising now that we would need to think about a 6 metre setback or do something different. And I appreciate that there is some issues raised there relating to the design of the screens, and my view is that's a very simple issue that could be resolved by a condition of consent. And there are a number of matters. My view of the report takes a bit of a scattergun approach to a variety of issues, but it comes down to sort of only a key number of issues. Underlying all of this is the site itself, which is isolated, so it's between 2 RFBs. We cannot amalgamate with an adjoining property. It's only a relatively small development of 10 units. And because of the site size, the basement size essentially dictates, or the width of the basement is across the site, which is dictated by the car parking that we need to achieve in the access aisles. And by association, that then in terms of where the access aisles go and where the parking goes, you have an associated location for a lift and a fire stair. So there's a suggestion that we should have the lift and the fire stair in the middle of the building. If we were to do that, it would be in the middle of the aisle, the car parking aisle, and it's just physically not possible. If we're to do it on the other side of the building, well, it's just on the other side of the building and we have the same issue. And I think it's important to understand there's a backstory to this, which is during a 2018 pre-DA meeting, the council's advice to us to a proposal then which had common open space at ground level was to put it on the roof. So we've gone and put it on the roof. And now we're told, well, it's not acceptable on the roof. The lift overrun is excessive. And so I'll suggest to you that that's an unfair proposition or position to take, given the commitments by the applicant to go to the expense of having a rooftop common open space and designing it in the manner that they have in response to those comments by council. With the location of the lift, there's sort of a variety of comments in the report about bulk and scale and amenity impacts on the neighbours. So I'd just like to break that down quickly. Bulk and scale, there's an image of the lift taken from the street and on a horizontal plane at the southern elevation. I think that's given a bit of a skewed view of the actual what you'll see. If you look at it from the side, the lift itself is set back 13 metres from the street boundary. And if you took an average angle of line of sight down to where someone would view it, you need to be in the middle of the road to be able to see it, which I'd suggest wouldn't be what someone is doing, and would be actually on the opposite side of the road to be able to see the lift. And when considered in conjunction with the neighbouring properties that have pitch roofs, and this is a flat roof, we have a lift overrun that's set back, and we have landscaping which will assist in concealing that. Then I think there's good grounds there, given all of what I've said about the pre-DA approach as well, that the lift in its location is acceptable, and particularly given the constraints with the basement. We have prepared, and it was late to the panel, an amended lift overrun, which reduces the lift overrun down to 1.3 metres above the height limit. And I know there are comments in the council report about a common open space being on the roof being acceptable, but the lift overrun was too large. So we've had a look at what we can do there to reduce it down. And that's so I've emailed some plans through to the panel secretary earlier today, and that includes a landscape space on top of the lift overrun and also in other parts of the common area. So eventually the landscaping will conceal from view the lift overrun. In terms of solar access, again, there's this scattergun approach saying that the amenities of the neighbours will be impacted. Looking at the solar access diagrams provided, the lift overrun itself at 9 AM midwinter falls onto the roof of the neighbouring building at number 50 Macquarie Place, and it actually falls onto a bathroom window. After that time, it falls on at midday. It falls onto the street, and at 3 PM it falls on partly the neighbouring property in the street, also with north being skewed on the property. So I can't see the amenity-related impact, if I'm honest. There is no privacy, there's no view loss. So we're looking at really a shadowing impact, which in my view is very minimal. To the next point, the entry lobby was raised in association with a lift location. As part of those amendments that I said were given to council earlier today, we've suggested that pulling the access off the side by, I think it's about 1 metre, 1.2 metres to get a planted edge on top of the roof of the basement lid to give landscaping along that edge. And again, we're limited to where the lift can go, so the lift naturally dictates where people enter the site, and to have a side entry point is the same as the neighbour, which has a side entry point number 50 on their eastern boundary. We've just replicated on our common boundary on the opposite side. In fact, where our basement entry point is, that's adjacent to the neighbour on the other side, the eastern neighbour, their driveway position as well. So I think it's a neat fit, basement to driveway entry to entry as you move across the site.
Mr. Black, do you have much more to say? I mean, just
I don't. There are only a few limited points. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, sure, great. The council's architect made some commentary about accepting the scale and the finishes of the building in the urban design commentary, which is in the report. They did have an issue with the vertical expression, and that was amended plans were provided to council, and unfortunately, I don't think those amended plans were given to the neighbouring properties to review. But the commentary from council's assessment report states that vertical expression has been provided, but then picks on the finishes. But the finishes were already accepted by council's architect as part of their SEP 65 assessment. So in summary, there are a limited number of issues I think the panel honestly has to deal with, and I think the amended plans that we provided earlier today will go a long way to that, whether that be an approval subject to deferred commencement on those plans being resolved, perhaps there's a deferral to come back with fully resolved set of documentation, but I'd urge the panel to keep this application at least alive, because if it's not this application, it'll be a section 8.2 which shortly follows, and we'll be back at the same position. It's probably quicker and neater process given council's resources to manage what we have at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. You've got two of your consultants or your team. Is there anything that they would like to say to substantiate or support what Mr. Black was saying?
We are fine. I think, Kitty, do you have any other things that you want to mention?
No, I'm good. I think Ben has got the case.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all on that. The next person to address the panel is Claire Partridge. Ms. Partridge, are you on the call?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Perfect. Hi, I won't take much of your time. I'm a new resident in Unit 42 to 44 Macquarie Place. Unfortunately, I wasn't made aware of the DA application when purchasing my unit. My unit is number 64244, so it is at the back of the property, and the living area and the bathroom and the kitchen all overlook 46 to 48 Macquarie Place, and so I'm concerned with the height of the building and obviously my view and my outlook being impacted. I know that you can't stand in the way of development, but just concerns with the plans that I've viewed on the site, and I was only made aware of it by another neighbour in my building. I obviously wasn't aware at the time last year when the letters went out to residents, because I wasn't an occupant at that time, so I just wanted to make sure that my objection to the current plans was heard. Apart from that, also I'm worried about impact street parking. I don't think a 10-unit block, I think there's 14 or 15 car parks that will be in the basement, but also I've looked at the arborist or which trees and stuff that they will be looking to cut down. My aspect, the trees at the back of the block cover a lot of the trees that I look out on that shade or act as a foil for the other unit blocks behind me. So I'm concerned with the loss of greenery in my view. So it's not just the westerly aspect that I'm impacted by. If they cut down a lot of the trees, which I was looking at the plan that they're planning to, it also impacts my bedroom views out the back. So I just wanted to raise my objections, but that's probably sufficient as long as it goes on record. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Partridge. Do any members of the panel have any questions of Ms. Partridge?
No, thank you, Chair.
No. Finally, on this development application, we have Ms. Behag. Could you address the panel? Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie. I live in Unit 6 in 50 Macquarie Place, which is on the western side of the proposed development. I've lived here for nearly 9 years. I own the apartment, and the reason why I absolutely love this apartment and have stayed so long is the beautiful sunshine and the beautiful views in my living room, which, you know, I treasure more than anything. In fact, Ben just said that the building overlooks the bathroom window. That's incorrect. It actually overlooks my only window out of my living room, and is, you know, the view that I look at every single day. I know that we don't own views, but out that window I look at many, many native birds in beautiful trees, rainbow lorikeets, cockatoos and kookaburras and bellbirds and owls. And they're all living in those palm trees and the trees that are going to get cut down. I'm absolutely devastated. Replanting small trees is not going to be acceptable for these birds. And, you know, there's not many trees in the area for these birds to relocate to. There's also bats and a whole bunch of other native animals that aren't being considered properly here. But I think if we get down to the nitty-gritty of the actual building, I have a huge amount of problems with the size. The size is completely out of line with, you know, the bulk and scale is completely inconsistent with everything around it. They're building it too close to the property line, far, far, far too close. It's going to impede on our sunlight, but also the height of the building is going to be way taller. And I'm going to have to look at that lift shaft, and, you know, I'm going to have to deal with the proposed barbecue smoke and the noise. There's already a huge amount of noise bouncing around out there from other apartments, and there's been no assessment on the noise that having a rooftop common area is going to create. But why is the council allowing something outside of ADG guidelines? It's not acceptable. It makes me so upset. I've cried about this so many times. I'm here representing all the other owners of this unit block who have all asked me to talk on their behalf as well, so you don't have to listen to them 6 times. But we are all absolutely beside ourselves. The other thing is we're in a flood zone, and that hasn't been accounted for in the development. In the hazards, it says that there's no hazards in terms of bushfire or flood. This is definitely a flood zone as visible on the council website, and over the last few weeks, our ground level has flooded several times. This is a basement car park being built next to us in a flood zone. Not only is that going to flood, but I'm concerned about the excavation actually undermining the foundations of our building. The report on the you know, I'm not an engineer, but even in the report it says that the ground in 2018 was very wet, and that's because where our building is and where the proposed development is actually used to be a creek a long time ago before Mortdale became developed. It is a flood zone. It's very inappropriate to be excavating next to us, and it could cause our building to collapse or have structural problems. It hasn't been looked at. I'm super concerned about safety around that, given the recent weather. But if I was going to cover up on the other things as well, and I know that I know this can't be considered, but in 2018, a rogue arborist actually entered our property and cut down very large trees adjoining where the development application is proposed. And he said it was an accident. So since then, we replanted a native garden with lemon-scented gum trees, coastal banksias, blueberry ash, loquats, lily-pilly, and other native shrubs. If this building goes in place, it's going to shade our native garden and common area where we have a seat and table to sit, not only killing our native common area plants and causing our common area to be in shade as it only receives morning sun, but it's also going to shade our clotheslines, which are the only way that we have to dry our clothes in the sheets. We don't have a dryer. We run an environmentally, you know, sustainable lifestyle, and I don't believe using a dryer should be necessary in Australia, other than like this week when it's been raining. But this building is going to shade our whole common area out the back, our whole garden, and our clotheslines, and that hasn't been considered at all. And it's also going to shade my entire living room, which has always been in the sun. And I'm on the top floor. The people below me are going to lose so much of their sun, and they're going to lose most of their privacy. All of the other apartments, so all 6 apartments in this building will be facing this development, and all 6 of them have their living room windows facing this, not bathroom windows. That is 100% incorrect. The bathroom windows are actually facing the north. And so all of us are going to have our sunlight stolen from our main living area in our apartment, which has not been considered at all. It's an old building. Most of us don't have air conditioning. We actually rely on the sun in the wintertime to warm our apartments and the cross ventilation. But we're also going to have a building site next to us for an entire year with asbestos and a whole bunch of other dangerous materials floating around. But I feel like our quality of life and our safety is going to be impacted by this, by the sun being stolen, by our garden being destroyed, by the plants in the garden haven't been considered on the arborist report. There's several trees that are over 3 meters tall now that haven't been considered on the arborist report. It needs to be redone. And also, there's 21 trees getting cut down. I mean, how could anyone say that it's acceptable to cut 21 trees down that are home to native animals that all of the apartments around here look over to and appreciate? It affects everybody's mental well-being. We don't want to look at a concrete box that's taller and wider than everything else in the street just because of money. So I'm very, very passionately upset about this. But the height and scale of the proposed development is excessive. It's 2 meters taller than clause 4.6 regulation of 12 meters. The lift shaft should fit within that 12 meters. I don't really care if it's inconvenient. It needs to fit within the guidelines. And the building should not come so close to the fence. It is half the ADG guidelines for the distance to the fence and between living spaces. So why is that being accepted? It's completely not acceptable. If privacy screens are not acceptable, it still means that, I'm going to have a wall in my living room window, which is the main window I look at every single day. I'm going to be looking at a privacy screen and a wall. It's absolutely dreadful. I've lived here for 9 years, and before that I've lived in the area for 34 years. And, to have my, a third of my life I've been in this beautiful sunny apartment that I absolutely adore, and the council's going to let people come in and build something that's not only visually distasteful, but distasteful and inconsistent with the rest of the character and heritage of the suburb. The shadowing of what light we have, it's just over our common area, and clotheslines needs to be addressed. The replacement trees have been placed on the proposal are actually all for really large growing species that are going to be planted right on our fence line. And that's really inappropriate, because then that's going to have very large trees taking more of our sunlight from our lot than the building is already. And also they're going to cause problems, because we're going to have a whole bunch of large 35 meter, potentially eventually 35 meter trees growing on our fence line. It adds issues a lot.
Could I, do you have much more that you need to say?
Yeah, I do, because actually this is my life and my house and where I live. So I'm going to take as much time as I possibly can to address all of these things, because I actually don't feel that they've been addressed at all. Particularly saying it's our bathroom window and it's my living room. I did attach a photo of the window and my outlook from the living room in my submission. And I'd like to know when they're going to reconsider, our native garden, which had to be replanted after an arborist that was not employed by us entered our property and cut everything down around about the time of this development application going through. So, and also the flood zone. I mean, I've inserted a picture from the council's own website into my submission of the fact that this DA is in a flood zone, and it hasn't been accounted for at all. The building that is proposed doesn't have any clotheslines in the proposal, and when I read into it, it says that the residents will need to dry these on their own balconies, which is going to make this place look like Hong Kong or something dreadful. I mean, nobody else in this suburb does things like that. You wouldn't see it in Mosman or a nice place. So why are we going to accept that here? Why doesn't the council have recommendations for clotheslines, which is environmentally sustainable, other than encouraging people to have dryers and dry their clothes on their balconies, which I also will then have to look at people's jocks and undies drying out of my living room window. So there's also no parking available on the street. I often have to park my car 50, 60 meters from our apartment, and that's the current situation. By adding another 10 families, that's potentially another 20 cars, 14 car spaces is not enough. We don't have a roundabout or traffic lights. The end of the street is a one-way street. There is no considerations for the increase in traffic. The exit from Macquarie Place onto Boundary Road is very dangerous. There is often accidents there, and often it will take me 40 minutes to get from my house to Penshurst, only 1.5 kilometres away, because the traffic's so heavy in Mortdale already. We can't have 10 more families living on this street. They won't fit. So 70% of the proposed apartments only achieve the solar requirement. That means there's going to be constant use of electricity to heat and illuminate the lower parts of their building. So we're having more environmental effects and damages. The location of their bins in the basement means the council waste removal will not work as it does already, because they take the bins out for us twice a week. So I want to see what are they going to do, you know, to do that so it doesn't create more noise for everybody else, but also so we don't have another 20 bins sitting out on the street in the very limited parking spots that we have. So what I want to know is, you know, is the council going to investigate how this is going to destabilise the earth below our building? Because I believe it will. It's a 1982 building. You know, it's built on top of the ground. We've already got flooding issues downstairs. Excavating the block next to us right up to the fence line is surely going to cause a problem. And who's going to pay the bill when our building collapses and, you know, people get injured? But also, what's going to happen when the building next to us is flooded all the time? You know, what happens when that collapses? Like, it hasn't been considered at all. And if you read through, I know from digging in the backyard, planting our garden, that underneath us is wet clay sandstone. It's really nasty, because it used to be a creek. So, but the noise consideration, why can't the council consider the noise? I mean, already, if someone plays their TV loud just across from us, we can hear it. People are yelling at each other, neighbours fighting over just a little bit of noise at the moment. But you want to put a common area on the roof, which is going to bounce around. The council has themselves have suggested they put barbecues up there. My only window, which faces that building, is then going to have barbecue smoke blowing through it. I mean, how is any of this humane or acceptable?
Mr. Hager, I'm going to have to ask you to try and summarise any other points in about a minute or so, because we need to get through a few other applications as well. So I think you've covered a lot of issues. Were there other things that you really distinct issues or new issues that you want to do a highlight for us?
Look, I was just going to summarise it really succinctly. For what I've said, bulk and scale is not within ADG guidelines. It simply must be. It is way too big. It is way too tall. It is way too wide. It is way too close to my living area. The building's taking too much sunlight and too much of our privacy away. And the biggest issue for me is, you know, will it destabilise our building, but also the environmental impact. This is not an environmentally friendly development application. From the 21 trees removed, from the sunlight that is removed from our common area and garden, from the huge amount of birds and animals that are going to be displaced from having their habitat removed, native and some of them threatened species, which I would like to have looked at. And, you know, there's no clotheslines, and all in all, I just think this is a very non-environmentally friendly proposal that's actually going to severely affect the residents that live nearby. And I'm not the only one that feels like this. Everybody is passionately upset, very, very, very passionately upset about this.
Thank you for your comments there, then, quite elaborate. Are there any comments from members of the panel or questions from more to the point from the panel for Ms. Beag? No?
Jenny Simpson here. Just a quick one. It appears to me the community consultation component of this application, you know, just given the submission of responses received and given what we've heard tonight, that it seems like there's a huge swing towards objection to the proposal. So, yeah, I suppose, you know, this is my first panel meeting, and it'll be, you know, in honesty, to make sure that the community is in harmony. I don't feel there's harmony in regards to this proposal at the moment. That's my only comment.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Behag. We'll leave for the moment consideration of that application and move on to the final presenter to the panel, which is in relation to a different DA for the modification of the flat building consent for James Street in Blakehurst. Mr. Labert, are you on the call?
I am. Can the panel hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hi, panel. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I just have two things that I'd like to raise in relation to two of the conditions that are in the report. The first one relates to the condition number 1, the approved plans. This is, of course, a modification application, and the approved plans that are listed there in condition 1, it's on page 312 of the agenda for the panel's reference. Say the date of the plans prepared by PBD Architects are the 19th of the 1st, 2021, and revision B. Those are the approved plans from the DA. The modified plans for the section 4.55 are revision C and dated the 1st of the 12th, 2021. If the panel resolves to endorse the recommendation of the report, we'd appreciate that if that can be looked at to avoid us doing another modification to fix that error. The second one I'd like to raise is condition 7B. That's on page 315. This condition just states that prior to the issue of a CC, the applicant is to demonstrate on the CC plans photovoltaic cell systems on the roof, provide that detailed design, as well as providing an EV fast charging car space. Those aspects are fine. The concern that I'd just like to raise is about the paragraph at the end of that condition, or the sentence at the end of that condition. It states that the installation of those photovoltaic cells shall not exceed the building height development standard for the site under the COGRA DCP 2012. I'm not quite sure if this is just a standard thing that was left in, or if there's some kind of anomaly regarding this statement, because a building height development standard would be under the LEP, of course, rather than a DCP. There's no control for height under the DCP, but I suppose most importantly, the solar cells are on the roof, which does vary the height. They were present on the approved plans, as well as provided in more detail and slightly relocated as part of this modification. I suppose the concern that I'm raising to the panel is just there might be a potential conflict when we go to do our CC with that particular sentence as compared to the stamped plans, which would have the solar cells on the roof above the height control. These are located reasonably centrally where possible and not visible from the public domain. So I think the aspect of their existence on the roof was considered as part of the assessment of the original as well as the mod. So I think the easiest solution is that sentence is deleted for us, but I'd leave that in the hands of the panel to see what the best way of preserving the intent of the control while still allowing us to put those solar cells on the roof. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Labert. Do any members of the panel have questions or comments?
No questions.
No?
Thank you.
Okay. That ends the public part of the panel meeting this afternoon. I'd like to thank all of the members of the public who and applicants who presented to the panel. As I said earlier on the outset, we'll now go into closed session and consider what we've heard, and as well as the report from the council officers, and make our determination.
I have a feeling. Oh, Stephen, you just froze for a minute. So you just may have to close the meeting again. Thank you.
Yes. I'm not sure what happened there, but thank you. I think it was Meryl. So we'll now go into closed session. We will consider what we've heard this afternoon. We'll consider the council officers' report and make our decisions. And those decisions will be published on the council website within 24 hours. And that will be our conclusion of this meeting, as it were. So thank you again for participating, and all the best of the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.